Hello and welcome to Uncle Sal's Garage. Today we're going to be installing the crank and camshaft into the bottom end. Let's get started.
Step 1. Cleaning, cleaning, and more cleaning.
Okay, I should explain what I'm doing here because I'm cleaning the case halves in preparation for installing the crank. And, you could see here, after the cases were cleaned by my machinist, there's still residue, especially here, on the registers for the bearings. So I'm just kind of going through and hitting it with a Scotch-Brite and trying to get that residue off and get it back to, clean metal.
2 hours later.
Okay, I just got done cleaning these guys with a Scotch-Brite, and I used the slop sink to just wash off any residue. Now I'm going to take my compressed air, blow it dry. As a part of my cleaning process, I'm chasing the studs. For instance, here's an M8 right there, but I don't have, part of this kit doesn't have one large enough for the head studs, so I'm just kind of going with some parts cleaner and a wire brush, and I'm trying to just get all the grime and rust out of these guys.
As I was stripping the parts, I noticed a nut with this tooth inset, which I've never seen before. Let me know if you know what this is. And there you have it. Both case halves cleaned, mounted on the engine stand, ready for the install.
Okay, now with all of the dowel pins installed, I've placed the number 4 and the number 1 bearing in position. I'm about to scratch a line on it to sort of index its location. So when it's on the crank and it's oiled up, I know how to get it into alignment with the dowel pin.
Step 2. Assembling the crank.
Okay, let me talk you through what I just did here because I can't believe it worked. I was holding on a screwdriver the timing gear and with my gloved hand here, and it was heating up the timing gear with a hot air gun, and it actually worked. It got hot enough and expanded enough to slip on, and now it's not going anywhere. So, timing gear on the crank.
Great success.
Okay, so I'm going to follow the same process with the distributor drive gear as I did with the timing gear, meaning I'm going to hold it out on this screwdriver here, and I'm going to hit it with the hot air gun. And with my glove hand, I'm going to slide it onto the crank, lining it up with the woodruff key. I've been told there is no front or back to the distributor drive gear, so installation should be fairly easy. Be right back. I just inserted the snap ring and looks like it's in there. So it's certainly not able to move in any way. It's extremely tight. Everything together, nothing's moving. So I'm going to call that one done. Now that the case is done with the number 2 bearing in and number 4 and number 1 bearings marked for their position, I'm going to turn my attention back over to the crank, and we're going to get our rods installed. As I attach each rod, I'm going in and I'm hitting the inside of the bearing surface with oil, and I'm also throwing some oil into the hole there. Okay, we're going to pause here for just a minute. We've got our rods on the crank, just finger tightened. I added some ARP lube off to the side there. And so we've got 3, 1, 4, 2. And we've got our numbers matching and facing out on all of them. So now we're going to go through our torque progression, first tightening to 12 foot-pounds, then 24, then 32. Okay, so here's my assembled crank. I've got my con rods on. They're torqued down to spec. I've got my number 3 bearing in here, and then I have my entire top part of it. So let's get this into the case.
Step 3, installing the crank and camshaft.
Okay, now that we've got our crankshaft in a good spot, we've got our connecting rods on, we've got our bearing and our gears on, let's turn our attention to getting the camshaft together. I've got the cam gear in the vise, and I'm ready to go ahead and install our bolts here, our screws, to mate these two pieces together. Something important to point out here when assembling the camshaft is, you want to have the circle there pointed up, and when that's pointed up, you want your rear lobe pointed down. And if you could see here on the camshaft itself, there's a number 1 and then a number 2 kind of at the 12 o'clock and the 6 o'clock position. So when your circle is up, number 1 is up, number 1 lobe is down. That's pretty much the alignment there. So looks like the cam gear is all put together. Okay, I've got my cam bearings installed, and I've got my number 2 bearing in there. I've got my dowel pins, and on the other side I've got the same thing. I've got my cam bearings in, I got my number 2 bearing with a dowel pin behind it, and I'm ready to lay down this crank and this cam. Be right back. Now that the cam and the crank are in the motor, I am going to test for clearance issues. So I'm going to try and set the camera up here and rotate the crank with both my hands, trying to keep the rods pretty straight as if they are connected to a piston. And let's see if we've got any clearance issues with our stroker crank and our cam. Nice. No problemo. There's no problem here as it sort of rotates.
All right, well, there you have it. The crank and cam are installed into the bottom end, and we're on to the oil system.
Next up on Uncle Sal's Garage, installing the oil system in the 2270.